Hello. Thank you, those of you, for joining me here. Um, yeah, my water's that side. So, if you're new here, feel free to subscribe if you want to see more from my channel, and actually, feel free to click the like button if you find this interesting or helpful. I don't yet know what you'll find interesting or helpful because I don't know what we're going to talk about. My hair's a bit of a mess. That's because since washing it, I haven't put anything in it. Normally, I fill it with or spray it with something. So, hope all of you are okay over there in the live chat land. And the sleep meditation that went live this morning at 4 a.m. was so this week's sleep meditation. Hello, was the story. I'm trying to remember it. The story with the tree. Well, I've been sleeping as much as I need to. I fall asleep and I wake up without alarm clocks or anything, so I get the sleep that I get. I don't sort of roam around tired. Buried in Cats. It is the one that almost made me cry. Yeah, it's the one with the girl in the zoo who falls asleep in the back of the car. I think I'm trying to remember it. Falls asleep in the back of the car to the sound of the rain and the windscreen wipers while they're driving home, and ends up finding herself in a different land, in a different time. Hello. Yeah, finds themselves in a different land in a different time, and ends up learning about an ancient organism, and then the tree of life, and why this tree is inside a palace, before finding their way home and then finding that it wasn't a dream, it was real. Thank you, and welcome for sort of popping in over here into the live chat and into the stream. It's always good to have some people watching. So I don't yet know what people are going to want to talk about. I don't have anything planned specifically. I will try and keep it to a reasonable time this time. Thank you. I don't think of myself as good at telling stories. Just okay at doing therapy. Possibly you might get a character named Dan who gets sat on by a cat. And hello to Lincolnshire. Falling asleep is good. Well, am I able to grow a full beard? Not. I've never tried. I don't really. I'm obviously in my 40s now, and I don't really understand this obsession. I don't know what it's like elsewhere in the world, but over here it seems to be that as soon as men hit their mid-30s, they suddenly grow beards and have these massive beard things going on. I have areas where it doesn't grow really. So if I grew one, those bits there would be. I should just get a pen and draw on myself. Those bits there don't really grow much hair, so I'd have a bit there, um, bits down there and around there, and probably there, and obviously I get some down the sides as well. Um, so yeah, so I don't really normally I shave, but I'm also very lazy. Normally I shave like once every weekish, normally because I'm going live at 10 p.m. on a Monday night, and so I think, oh, I suppose I better shave. I've got a live stream. Um, because of how emotional it was around at least to me, telling it, and I kind of knew it was going to be as well, um, around me telling about the tree and the person who gave up his life to give the tree life. And so yeah, so it was that, um, that was the thing. It was that, yeah, the civilization had essentially, um, kind of killed off the environment. So pretty much, had gone beyond just technologically advancing through to a point where they were now, um, kind of wrecking the world they lived in, and then they essentially killed their own civilization off by, um, the fact that they're actually, so like many civilizations have, like the Mayas and things like that, that they end up killing themselves off because of their actions around the environment. And so that kind of happens, and everything pretty much apart from the fungus dies on the planet, and there's this one person left, who who finds a tree, like just the starts of a new sapling, and he's aware of how much he has to value that sapling and help and nurture that sapling. So he spends his entire life helping and nurturing that sapling, um, sitting by that sapling as it grows up, and then sitting under the tree as it starts becoming a proper tree, and continuing to nurture it, continuing to bring it water, and continuing to make sure that it's being looked after and that it's growing well. And his last act is dying sitting against the tree, and then obviously the nutrients of his body become the thing that gives the tree its final bit of life, that makes it the tree of life, that allows that tree to reach the water beneath it, to grow that extra little bit to reach the river that flows underneath the ground. It finally gets to reach down to there, gets the water, and then life starts springing up around the tree where the person had given his life. Um, and so that, as I was telling it, um, nearly made me cry. So I had to hold back on how much I was telling and how emotional I was making it while telling it, because or else I would have ended up crying rather than telling a story. And because it's live, I can't do that, because I can't kind of, if it was pre-recorded, I'd be able to just go with the flow and then edit it afterwards. But I can't really do that live. So that's kind of um, what I did. So yeah, yeah, I don't really understand what would be satanic about um, a tree giving life to more life through nutrients and stuff. Um, what's my favourite story out of mine? I don't know. I quite like the ones with the autistic boy, because that's based obviously on me. Um, the autistic boy is kind of based on stuff that I used to do, but obviously it's expanded on for a story. The trying to, what else? I quite like things like the mermaid one, the one with the woman meeting the mermaid, and uh, realizing that they end up falling in love. So I quite like that one. Um, and I'm trying to think what other ones I like. I obviously like things like my Cabin in the Woods one, where obviously there's the foxes in the tree and the little fox family, where the brown fox meets the white fox because the brown fox normally hibernates through the winter and doesn't get to see the white fox. The white fox is normally not around during the summer and doesn't get to see the brown fox, and then they have this interaction where they finally meet each other. And then you've also got the owl that rescues the gerbil or hamster, whatever it was. Um, you've got the I can't remember, the lake, and you've got going to town and socializing, um, going in the woods, and all sorts of things. The Northern Lights and different bits like that. I think are all in that. So I quite like um, that one as well. And probably like most people, I quite like the ones that end up going on much longer. I quite like the ones where I'm able to give a fuller story, so to speak, something that's perhaps an hour long or something, but probably not for the same reasons. So others like something that's maybe an hour long because then I get people saying things like, "Oh, I then don't get restless when I'm falling asleep." Um, I don't get restless that maybe I won't fall. It's always people will say things like, "I'm normally asleep in 5 minutes, but I worry that if the track is only like 35 minutes long, I might not be asleep at the end of it, and so I then worry, and that impacts on my sleep." Um, so people say that's why they quite like the long ones, and others say that they take a while to fall asleep, and so they like the long ones for that reason. For me, it's more about people. I don't know. It's more about wanting the full kind of. I like having that story. I like having a sort of fuller story, but that's just me. Yeah, the healing water one that surprised me because when I did that one, I thought it was quite boring, and yet it did quite well. And the thumbnail I chose for it was rubbish as well. So obviously, this is going back a long time. The thumbnail I chose for that one quite a while ago, um, I wasn't overly happy with. I couldn't find the thumbnail I wanted. Uh, I was looking for royalty-free images and things like that. Couldn't find the thumbnail to kind of go with the healing water story, um, and so I wasn't happy with the thumbnail, and I wasn't happy with the story, and yet that one ended up doing quite well compared to the others. I think that was among my 40 a day one. There's one that I think is just called the healing water or something along those lines. I'm assuming we're talking about the same story, but one from my 40 that were done for my 40th birthday. Um, Anyone who's still around when I turn 50, I'm not doing 50 stories for my 50th birthday because that was really, really stressful having to do. Because I did all my usual, those of you who are around in 2018 will know I did all of my usual videos that I was doing constantly. But on top of doing all those videos and doing videos every time my channel passed another 1,000 subscribers, I was also doing 40 back-to-back sleep stories, one every single night for the 40 days up to my 40th birthday. Um, so yeah, and so people did say to me, um, how they don't know how I did it, and I agree. I don't know how I did it. It was so stressful to do that. Um, but yeah, what I do for anyone who doesn't know is I obviously put my stories into playlists so that the so that you can do I put them in lots of different types of playlists, but I put them in places of time of duration as well, like 25 to 35-minute stories, 35 to 45-minute stories, under 25-minute stories, so that you can find the kind of time, the kind of length that you want. um, It probably is called the healing water. I'd have to click off of looking at myself in my computer screen to try and find it. Um, So yeah, because I'm aware that some of my stories can be used very well for things like if you want to take advantage of your ultradian nap. If you want to take advantage of that kind of ultradian dip, especially the one that happens in the afternoon, where your daily cycle and your sort of 2 hour, 1.5 to 2 hour cycle both kind of intersect at often about 3ish in the afternoon, and you can get a significant dip of wanting to go inside and wanting to drift off and maybe have a nap or whatever. um yeah, the couple freezing in time, the frozen in time trip one, I think it is, the couple's frozen in time trip or something like that, where they walk through the cavern, they touch the water. I think this is what happens. And then when they leave the cavern, suddenly everything's frozen, and it's as the water appears, and they get to, obviously, because all my stories are around helping with anxiety, stress, and worry. I'm obviously giving healing therapeutic metaphors, sort of patterns for people to uh, embed and start kind of learning and responding to. And one thing that obviously helps significantly around worry and anxiety and stress is being able to learn to be in the moment rather than uh, kind of not being in the moment and ending up, thinking about the past or the future, or thinking about somewhere else that's not like just being present. Um, and so a story where you've got this frozen time obviously works quite well for that. Yep, Cabin in the Woods I'd mentioned. That's definitely one that I quite like. Um, I don't know what makes that one so much more popular than all my others. Um, and I know there's been lots of complaints about me having an owl in it. People don't like owls, it seems. Um, but yeah, so obviously all my stories are designed to be, promoting positive mental health and well-being, and as well as promoting sleep. But I'm aware that different people take different lengths of time to fall asleep or to, uh, to relax, or people like just different types of things. So I quite like, that's why I quite like having a range of different lengths of sleep stories on my channel, so that those who think I just want something for, in fact, someone, I can't remember who it was, and if it's someone who's here in the live chat bit, um, had specifically said, oh, it'd be great if I had a playlist of the ones that were like 20 minutes or less, so that they could use them for power naps, so that when you just want to have, or a meditation where you just want to do something short in the afternoon. Um, and so I made a specific playlist of that, of those short ones, so that you can use that. So although I've got a playlist of ones that are under 25 minutes, I made a specific playlist of ones that are kind of 7 minutes upwards, so that you can do the sort of power nap thing or meditation, like an afternoon meditation, where something that's an hour long or an hour and a half long, as some of mine are, might end up being too long. Something that's an hour and a half could run the risk that you fall asleep during it if you're tired at all. And this is during the day. If you're tired at all during the day and you're listening to it, then that hour and a half one or an hour long one, you might fall asleep at some point during that. And then you might wake up feeling really groggy and not feeling particularly good. So, yeah, I wouldn't be able to do a playlist of ones with long pauses, because I wouldn't be able to find them. I can find, and obviously, because nearly all of, one thing would, it would depend what people are classing as a long pause. Now, so the only ones that don't have long pauses, or don't have normal length pauses, as I would prefer to term it, are the ones that I released at the end of 2019. So everything prior to that, I left the pauses as they were supposed to be. So as I expect them to be for the track. But because of all the complaints about, from people saying, "Oh, don't like all this pausing stuff," I edited a bunch of them that I was posting in December, in late November and into December, I edited them and made every pause only 4 seconds long, so that there was no pause ever longer than 4 seconds, so that people wouldn't complain. And then towards the end of that, so that was then that led to the opposite thing that I think, Ellen, it might have been you as one of the people who was saying that I sound more rushed on these stories and I don't sound so relaxed or whatever. I can't remember your wording. But a few people had commented that kind of thing. And yet I knew the story itself and the way I'd recorded it was exactly the same as every other story. I'm sitting in the same location. I'm doing it to the microphone in exactly the same place. I've normally done these stories back to back, exactly the same as I always had. The only difference was that I had edited the silences down to 4 seconds so that anything over 4 seconds would shrink, anything under 4 seconds would stay the same. Um, so that was the only difference that I'd made, but it was giving off the impression from the comments I was getting that I suddenly sounded rushed. I didn't sound like I was giving proper time and all these sort of things. So that encouraged me to think probably it's just a few vocal people, because what people privately, like in my private life, in my doing hypnotherapy courses and things like that, what they would always say is that one thing they appreciated more than anything else was that I gave them time to do the inner work. And um, so what I ended up concluding, obviously reflecting on it all, was perhaps it's just a vocal few people who are saying we hate the pauses, and that most people who are subscribed to my channel, given that it's not really the people subscribed to my channel who I think are saying that, because why would you subscribe to my channel if you didn't like it? So my view was perhaps it's just these vocal people and they're actually in the minority, but they're very vocal. So I then decided before the end of December that I was going to go back to, no, I know what I do. I've done it for 20 odd years. And so I'm going to do these stories how I want to do them. I'm going to make the pauses what I want the pauses to be and what I think they should be based on my professional experience and the feedback from real people who I've trained and clients and things that I've had. So yeah, and that's the whole point. They give people time to follow the instructions, and I would answer that to all of the comments. I'd keep saying the pause is there intentionally, because if I ask you to look up at the sky and I wonder whether there are any clouds in the sky, you need time to process that inner whatever's going on inside you to work out whether there are clouds in the sky, and if there are, what those clouds are like. If I then talk about, having that sense of touching the bark of a tree, if I then move on straight away, you haven't had time to have a sense of touching the bark of the tree. You need me to pause. And likewise, if I'm giving therapeutic suggestions, you need time to action those therapeutic suggestions. So I went back before the end of December to doing things how I wanted them done and posting them. Now I don't care if I get bad comments or comments about the pauses. I just pretty much ignore them. But initially I did think, oh, maybe that's what everyone thinks. But then when I got the comments the opposite way, obviously I then corrected them and just thought, no, I'll do it my own normal way. So in theory, there should only be whatever I posted, say mid-November to the end of December, roughly, would have the shorter pauses. Anything prior to mid-November and anything after December, or say after the first week in January, because it was Christmas, I'd recorded the Christmas period, so the Christmas and the January, first week of January, I'd recorded those stories already, obviously just before the Christmas period, so I wouldn't have to edit them over Christmas. The only ones I edited over Christmas were the 2 live periods. And yeah, so, and people have generally seemed to like the long pauses being back again. So yeah, but I largely try and ignore a lot of the kind of comments about things like sort of the pausing or stuff that I just think isn't really relevant, or is people not bothering to understand or whatever. Um, but yeah, I'm glad that some people like the pauses. But that's why I wouldn't be able to just instantly go and do a um, these ones all have long pauses in them track playlist, because I wouldn't know what exactly um, would work. Yeah, I wouldn't know how long you're classing as a long pause and what have you. Um, yeah, I don't mind people putting bad comments. I prefer people to give me a bad, so to speak, comment than a thumbs. I don't mind the thumbs down either, but yeah, I like it having a bad comment with the thumbs down so that I can see what it was that made them decide to give it a thumbs down. Because obviously you can't please everyone, and I'm just an average person, so there's always room to grow and learn. And so what you want is, if you, for example, if I release a story and that story doesn't resonate with people, then I'm happy for people to share why that story doesn't resonate, so that I can then think, ah, so it didn't resonate because, you know, I've got rid of the long pauses, or it didn't resonate because this specific individual, and then I take that on board and decide, is it something that is actually relevant for me to make a change, or is it something that actually I need to make a change, or is it something that's just an opinion that isn't really relevant to me changing? Um, and so obviously I realized with the pausing that I was bowing down kind of to the sort of vocal, maybe one or two comments on every single video. That kind of, it's on every video, kind of meaning vocal because it's always there. Um, Comments about the pauses, and obviously I'd had conversations with yourselves, many of you in live chats and things, saying about the pausing and saying about how with the pausing, I know that it's relevant. I know why I do it. I have videos explaining why I do it. Um, and part of adding the guided sleep meditation part to my videos was because people were misunderstanding. People were saying, but Stephen Fry doesn't do this in his stories. And, you know, the Calm app doesn't do this in their stories. And I'd be trying to explain, these aren't just stories. These are to really absorb you in the experience that you're having. They're for you to have an experience, not just to be told a story. And to have an experience, you need time to become absorbed in the experience. Some people are incredibly fortunate that you can say something. Yeah, anyone who does hypnosis will know this. Um, you can have some people who literally, I've done demonstrations where I've said, okay, who wants to come up here and go into hypnosis next? And I always kind of word it implying, if you come up here, that's what you're agreeing to do. And then I'll say, okay, I'm going to do a certain demonstration, whatever it is. And I'll turn to the person and go to do the demonstration. And literally, the second I look at them and say, okay, now, they shut their eyes and they're gone. And I think, no, let me demonstrate. Let me at least start the demonstration. So you get some people who respond so quickly and so easily that I envy them. I think I'd love to be able to be that responsive to things, that if you say, imagine this, it's like, yep, I'm there. You know, it's all real for me. Whereas most people obviously aren't like that. Most people, you have to take your time over. You have to allow them time to become absorbed in the experience and to hopefully kind of live that experience, which is why I make all of my stories, um, apart from perhaps the Dragon's Fire series and one or two others that I did specifically to be a bit more adventurous, that aren't really tailored for everyone, and which is also another reason I did all my playlists, so that people could then differentiate if you didn't like that kind of thing. Um, so apart from those ones which have things like dragon slaying and stuff in, all of my stories obviously are done around love, compassion, kindness, connecting with the moment, um, having a sense of peace, having a sense of wonder, all these kind of positive things to hopefully make people have a sense of hope and a sense of feeling good after you've listened to them, and hopefully even while you're listening to them, um, so that they can help to address things like worry and stress and anxiety and what have you. Um, so I'm about to look and see what on earth has been going on in the live chat while I've been talking. As I said the other day, I was going to try to just let the live chat flow so that when I look at it, I only see what's on my screen at any one time, instead of doing what I normally do, which is scroll back and see what on earth has been going on and then try and follow it. Uh, and so I'm glancing over every now and then and seeing a mix of comments about pentagrams and then comments that I then answer that seem to make more sense. I like to think that most of us are just average. I think, I don't know, Rose, if you've heard this before, because I don't know what streams you've been in, but I have mentioned this once before. I'm obviously have some of my stuff on other apps, like I have some of my stories on the Slumber app and a few other apps out there. And on one app, I was curious how the app was doing. So it wasn't obviously about me at all, but I was curious how the app was doing, whether because it was a new app, it was a new person starting this app who created this app. Um, I had said I'd let them have some of my stories to get their app going, and so I looked at the reviews for this app because it had, I think, a few thousand downloads or something. I can't remember. It kind of said I can't remember if it said more than or less than or whatever, but it gave a hint at kind of the rough amount of downloads. And then I saw that there was like a 1-star review, so I thought I'm going to click on that, see what it says. Clicked on it, and it was a 1-star. My stories were the only ones on it at this point. It was a 1-star review saying this American's attempt at a British accent is absolutely terrible. It's probably the worst fake British accent to try and appear British and try and get people to subscribe because of people loving British accents so much. Um, there is no way I can take it seriously, and obviously I am not an American faking a British accent, and I'm not an American faking a British accent really badly. I may be doing a bad British accent, but it is my accent. Um, so yeah, so I just found that amusing when I saw it, that I'd got a 1-star review technically for my accent because of it sounding so fake. Normally, it's that people think that I'm Australian. Yeah, so they thought my accent was fake. Thank you. I'm glad that my accent is lovely. Um, Abby's been watching a lot of Friends lately. Obviously, while we're kind of not going out a great deal, and she'd got to the episode where Ross gets his university job and puts on his um, fake British accent that he says he sort of spontaneously came up with when he went and talked. And I don't do an accent as bad as that. Thank you for another loving my accent. Um, but yeah, so I have had the Australian thing a number of times. I probably couldn't do an American accent, and I wouldn't know what American accent I was doing if I did. I'm definitely not good with accents, at least not by trying. So I mimic accents spontaneously. Obviously, being autistic, I mimic sounds that I hear. So if someone says, say, a sentence that sounds bouncy or something, I might end up instinctively, without even realizing it, mimicking what they've just said in their accent, which has got me in trouble in work a few times when I used to work for employers. Um, but if someone then said to me, as Abby has sometimes, "Oh, do that again, that accent again," I can't do it because I can't do it when you tell me to. In fact, it's when you tell me I've done it, that's when I first realize I've done it. I don't know I've done it um, at the point that someone, yeah, at the point I do it, I don't know I've done it. It happens automatically, and my head is often elsewhere. Um, God, that's a horrible thought that I sound more American than British. When I was in school, in secondary school, I was told I was always mocked by other students for sounding posh and having a very posh British accent, which is stupid coming from a council estate. Um, well, living in council houses. In fact, in secondary school, uh, teachers. So now we've got far more strict data protection rules. But back when I was in school, in the olden days, um, teachers would read out on your first day of term. They'd read out the register, and they would say your address, and you had to confirm in class in front of all of the other children what your address is. So they would say your address, and you then have to confirm. Yep, that's what my address is. And my address when I started secondary school was 4 council cottages. So instantly, the second they say that, it's like, "Oh, you live in a council house. You live in a council house," and they take the Mickey. And in my head, I'd be thinking, "Yeah, but you don't know where it is." And where it was up on a hill in the middle of the countryside, in a little place called Warning Camp, where it's so small there was no pubs, there's no shops, there's literally a post office at the end of the road. That was it. It's such a small place to live. And no, me sounding American is horrible. I should sound British or something. Yeah, so I used to often sort of in my head think you're mocking me because my address is council cottages, which does obviously prove I live in a council house because we are very poor. But I literally out my window see Arundel Castle. That's literally, I look out my window, I see Arundel Castle. On the fields and the hills behind my bedroom window, I would see lots of deer. I'd see stags. Um, I'd see foxes. I'd see different birds of prey flying over. There was no light pollution, so I'd be able to have my telescope out every night and see the stars, assuming it wasn't cloudy and raining. I could watch the trains going in and out of Arundel train station, in sort of off in the distance in front of Arundel Castle, and I could watch like the Orient Express steam train coming in to Arundel or leaving Arundel. Literally, I was on the doorstep of the woods, so I could go straight out into the woods. I didn't have, um, lots of annoying other school children around. There were school children in the area who had to catch the buses, but we were all quite spread out. Yeah, and so I used to think, yeah, you're mocking me because my address is council cottages, but actually, I live in probably a much nicer place location wise than you do. And then obviously when I grew up and I started working with children and families, including children and families going to exactly the same school, and when I lived in Littlehampton, where I went to secondary school, I knew that many of the people who mocked me and took the mickey out of me for my address being evident that it was a council house, they lived in council houses. It was just easier for them to bully someone who obviously lived in a council house than the fact that even the bullies lived in the council houses. I frequently have done stories about in fact, nearly every story I do ends up being about my hometown. I've always said that if there's one place that I feel I would call home, if someone said, "Where are you from?" even though I lived there from the age of 8 to 12 or 13 or 14 or whatever it was, um, so I wasn't born there or anything, that's where I would say home is. I spent all my time out in the woods, all my time, um, building tree houses, sledging down the hills out the back of the property, um, in the winter, sometimes in the summer. Sledges work perfectly fine on grass when the grass is wet. Um, I would spend all my time galloping cross country on my pony Snowy, which was a white sort of pony. Um, so yeah, so I have frequently done my stories kind of around. Sounds cool that you got to live down here and drive past Arundel Castle. And it's a good view from the train as well. If anyone ever travels to see me at Chichester, if you come from like London down, you go straight past the castle. A council house is essentially a house where your local authority owns the property and you're so poor that you can't even rent from a private landlord. You can't even afford the rents that you'd have to pay for a private landlord. So you rent a property off of the local government, essentially. And then you also get uh, so sort of social housing where private companies have bought the houses. So you're technically renting off a private company, but they are kind of at a much lower rent because you're doing it through the council. Yes, so my horse was called Snowy. We had a Shetland pony called Marcus, and I have fallen off of both of them, Snowy and Marcus. I fell off Marcus the day after the snow went. So there was a day when it had snowed so heavy, and the snow was much higher than I was. It was like 6 foot of snow, and I was asked, did I want to go out on Marcus in the fields? He'd not been able to go out of the sort of stables for like weeks because of the snow, and I took Marcus out into the fields the day after all the snow had disappeared, and he just bolted with me on him. Obviously, bolted around and around and around the field over and over and over and over again. And then once he was done bolting, it was like he just thought, right, had enough now, and he stopped. And obviously, anyone who knows physics, when the thing you're traveling on suddenly stops moving, you keep going. So I obviously just went shooting off him, landed in a bit of a heap, and then had to go back and get back on him again and carry on. So fortunately, I was never hurt. I've obviously been kicked by horses accidentally where I've walked behind them and startled them. And you do sort of touch them and let them know you're there, but you can still startle them. My mum was a riding instructor, so mum always said that I seem to have some kind of an affinity with horses, that literally part of her job would be to break in horses that haven't been broken in and are still quite wild, sort of in terms of their behavior and stuff. And I would go up to them and I'd be able to touch the side of them, sort of the side of their neck, and manage to help kind of create a connection and keep them calm and keep me calm. And then they would come up along the fence and I'd just climb off the fence and climb onto their back, bareback, and they would kind of trot around and go around with me on the horse. Yes, horse kicks hurt. I used to believe I was going to grow up to be a farrier. I don't ride horses now. I They're just not in my life. I've got nothing against them. I just don't. There's no opportunity. I just don't encounter horses to ride them. Um, but yeah, so I've fallen off a number of times, and um, normally because they suddenly stop and I haven't stopped yet. Um, and I have obviously been kicked a handful of times, which is uncomfortable. Uh, been stood on as well. Um, Obviously, accidentally, you'll get a horse that stands on your foot and just seems to stand there, kind of like an immovable object, except that it's on your foot, and you're trying to nudge on it, and it doesn't go anywhere. It just carries on eating food or something, and you all you did was gave it food, and as a thanks, it stood on your foot and just stayed there. Um, so yeah, so I used to go on horses obviously quite a lot. There's lots of photos of me on horses, and some of you may or may not have seen my fun attempt at photo editing from years ago, where I turned Snowy into Pegasus, essentially, with me on his back. But yeah, I've got family that live over in Worthing area, just down the road. They're just down the road, and even without any of this current situation, I see them about once every year or two. Yeah, Southern England is nice, as is obviously lots of places in England. I obviously, well, I say obviously, it's only if you've been in the streams where I've talked about it you'd know this. I've obviously travelled up to Scotland. A few times. Um, I've been up to Loch Ness. I spent a week on a uh, cabin cruiser on Loch Ness searching for Nessie, driving it. This is as a young child. I was like 13 or 11. No, I was 11, I think. I don't know, some age like that. Um, Traveling up and down Loch Ness, searching for the Loch Ness monster. Then obviously I've talked before about meeting Doctor Who in Arundel. Yeah, there seems to be a thing about horses. It's as if they know that they are standing on your foot because they just don't bother moving over. Um, but yeah, so having my mum as a riding instructress, that's how she managed to um, afford the horses. Because obviously the idea was that she's paying money um, sort of for the horses and the ponies and everything. But that money's, some of it's being covered by teaching people to ride. And obviously that meant having a mum as a riding instructor. She obviously taught me to ride and what have you. I have had a cow stand on my foot as well. Yeah, Scotland's very nice. The weather wasn't quite as good as down south when I went to Scotland. I spent a lot of it in a raincoat that was far bigger than I was. I will probably see if I can keep it to an hour. It depends if there's anything that takes longer. What age did I start reading Erikson? Probably late teenager. I started reading a little bit of Milton Erickson, or stuff about Milton Erickson as a teenager. I'd read sort of about Milton Erickson in NLP books while I was a teenager, so kind of 93, 1994-ish. And then and in self-hypnosis books, his name would crop up, but normally in a bad way. No, I didn't show the signed copy of the Erickson signature thingy. I'll do that in a minute if anyone's interested. But yeah, and then it was in my early 20s. So I got time distortion in hypnosis out of the library when I was like 19 or something, and I really wanted to keep it. I couldn't find it for sale. It wasn't available. It wasn't in print, so I couldn't find it for sale anywhere. There wasn't the internet, at least not like there is now, and I didn't have the internet at home or anything, so I couldn't find the copy of it. And so I kept on getting it out the library over and over and over and over again. Time distortion in hypnosis. Obviously now I've got a couple of copies, but I've got one somewhere here. I've shown it before. It smells nice. So time distortion in hypnosis. Did I find Nessie? No, I took some photos of what I knew would look like Nessie, but I knew they weren't Nessie. Yeah, so I read time distortion in hypnosis over and over again, and then ended up, I think, probably about 23 years old, something like that, 24 years old. That was when I finally bought some books, specifically kind of by Milton Erickson and what have you, and started getting very into Erickson's work. And I think I bought some of my first books were the ones done by other authors, but of transcripts of Erickson, like the 4 seminars, workshops, and lectures of Milton Erickson, and the teaching seminar with Milton H. Erickson. And so I bought a whole bunch of them at one kind of time period. Yeah, if you've still got the pain tracks, I had to make room for sleep stories on my Google Drive, so I deleted them off the Google Drive. But if you've still got them, I don't care who they get shared with. So yeah, and I was saying the other day, obviously, that I really like the workshop seminars and lectures of Milton Erickson series. I think they're really good. And I'd recommend them to anyone with an interest in Erickson's work. And somewhere up here, I've got one of my copies of Uncommon Therapy by Jay Haley, but this copy is signed by Milton Erickson from 1976. Abby found it on the Oxfam bookshop. So Oxfam being a charity over here. She found it on their bookshop. Yeah, I've got the complete works, and I've got all of the sort of black ones there as well. So Abby found it on Oxfam bookshop online, and it was going really cheap because it didn't say signed by the author, because it's not signed by the author. Yeah, he died in 1980, but he taught right up until shortly before he died. And yeah, so because it's not signed by the author, the book was listed as just Uncommon Therapy by Jay Haley. And I don't think people paid attention to the book they had. So it was for sale for relatively cheap. And I was in the other room. Abby was in the bedroom on the computer and was just saying, do you, there's a book here signed by Milton Erickson. Are you interested? And I'm just saying, just put it in your basket and buy it. Even before I saw it, I was just saying, just put it in your basket, buy it right now. Because previously I'd had the experience of there was a signed Milton Erickson book for sale for I think £350 or £400, something like that, and then another like £50 for postage. And I was thinking, oh, do I buy it? It's a lot of money, but it is a signed Milton Erickson book. And I thought I'll just sleep on it. If I still want it tomorrow, I'll then buy it. So obviously, I woke up the next morning, wanted it, and thought I'm just going to buy it because I've been after a signed Milton Erickson book for so long. I'm just going to buy it, and it had sold out. It had already gone. So I'm sure there's a lot of other obsessed people like me out there who literally every single day, the first thing they do in the morning is search every bookstore, Abe Books, Amazon, Oxfam Books, things like that, for things like Milton Erickson books to look for signed copies, and eBay as well. Um, so every single day, I do those searches. I do the, search on Amazon, search on eBay, search on Oxfam Books, search on Abe Books for hypnosis books. I have a series of things I search for: hypnosis books, hypnotherapy books, neurolinguistic programming books, Ernest Rossi books, Milton Erickson books, Darren Brown. So I have a series of things that I search for back to back. And then once I've searched and bought anything that I end up wanting, which is less as time goes on because I've got more already at home, then once if I see anything I want, I just go and buy it nowadays. I do have a signed copy of. It's not Game of Thrones. I've got a signed copy of. In fact, it's sort of down there. Of Fire and Ice. I think. No, what is it? I don't know. Whatever the recent one is by George R.R. Martin. Nope, never received a call from someone like that. But it sounds like something that could be a good opportunity. If it depends what they're talking about in relation to hypnotherapy. If it's for people to become better golfers, then obviously that's a good opportunity. If they just want hypnotherapy, then it might be good for referrals. But there is tons of research around improving performance, sports performance and things like golf. I've got a bunch of books up here specifically on that subject. So yeah, but in relation to sharing my tracks, it depends what it is. Things like the pain ones, they're not available anywhere, and they might help people. And it doesn't cost me any money or lose me any money, given they're not available in any shape or form. If they're just out there publicly, people using them, it makes no difference. And they don't have my name on, so people probably won't know who I am, who the hypnotist is. But if they're handed to people by referral, obviously then whoever hands them to people might say, "Oh, the guy's name is Dan Jones" or something, or they might tell people. But generally, if I don't have something available at all, Red James. I don't know if I know the name Red James. So if I don't know, so if I have the stuff just out, Tad James. I know that there's a lot of stuff that's gone on over the years in relation to Tad James being very protective over things. In fact, within the NLP community at large, there's been an overprotection of things. Of like, this idea is mine and no one else is allowed it, even though it's quite a common idea. Like, it's quite common for people to talk about timelines, regardless of timeline therapy. It's quite common for people to talk about timelines. Fire and Blood, that was the one. So I'm not a sort of an amazing fan of Tad James, but I do have knocking around somewhere here, probably behind me, a number of Tad James books. And I have, I'm trying to see where it is, Tad James book somewhere. I can't see where it is. Hypnotherapy book, but I think I've put it in a separate, different place to his NLP books. Yeah, the whole copyright things, and it just seems kind of like I know there was the issues around NLP in the early to mid 1990s around, like, anyone who uses neurolinguistic programming, talks about neurolinguistic programming, has to give Richard Bandler a fee every year for the fact you're using that, and all that sort of rubbish. The whole field went through a stage where everything was about money and not about helping people. And all these people that allegedly seem to be focusing on being helpful to people were instead focusing on trying to sue each other over who owns what copyright, around things that are actually largely just either common knowledge among many other fields, or very few bits were actually things that were copyrighted to that to something that individual created, like intellectually. And I've got, let me just put Uncommon Therapy back on the shelf. Annoyingly, I don't think Igor Ledochowski's done a volume 2 yet, but I've got things like the second edition of Igor's The Deep Trance Training Manual. That's quite a good book. The first edition was good as well. Yeah, NLP kind of crops up everywhere. There's some issues I have with NLP generally. Tony Robbins is another one. There's some issues I have with NLP generally. One is that, like, I've got shelves of NLP books behind me, sort of at the bottom here, and there's very little in the NLP books that is anything original, anything that's kind of just what you would say that is NLP. And then the bits that are kind of touted often as NLP don't end up holding up to scientific scrutiny. And then when you tell people, oh, well, that was proved not to be correct, that theory that was developed there, this theory was also proved not to be correct, that's from within NLP. As soon as you start saying these things, people then get very defensive of NLP rather than following the science. So it doesn't mean NLP has no value, because there's stuff in NLP that I use, but a lot of it, I planned to interview Richard Bandler many years ago, and I'd arranged to interview him. He was very strict about what I was allowed to do. I wanted to audio record the interview, so that I was going to do a written interview, write it up, but I wanted to audio record it so that I would make sure I was accurate in what I was then writing up. And but Richard Bandler said it can't be audio recorded. He will not allow it to be audio recorded. I had to send the questions I was going to ask him up front. I had to send them first of all, sort of a couple of weeks beforehand, so that he would authorize whether he's happy to answer those questions, and he can plan how he's going to answer those questions. And I was told if I deviate from those questions at all, interview is instantly over and I'm told to leave. On the day I was due, he was doing a course in Brighton, which isn't that far from me, and that's why I was specifically trying to get this interview, because I thought, oh, he's just down the road. I might as well see if I can get an interview with him. And on the day, I got a message saying, "Don't bother coming. He's not going to do an interview with you. Um, he's doing an interview with the BBC instead." So now that I had some free time, I sat at home thinking, "Oh, Richard Bandler's on the BBC live," which it's going to be live. Richard Bandler's on the BBC doing this interview. I listened to the interview, and the BBC didn't follow the guidelines that I was told. They asked him what they wanted to ask him. They put pressure on him around things like, why won't you allow NLP to be uh, sort of studied and allow people to gather evidence around the efficacy of NLP? And he was saying, because I know it works, so there's no need for scientists to study it. And so the BBC journalist was saying, well, that's not going to gain credibility, really, if you're not going to do that. And I was thinking to myself when I was listening to the interview, you would have been better off letting me, the person who would have made you look good, because that's what I would have done, turn up and do my interview rather than blowing me out for the BBC, who didn't follow any, of your strict guidelines. So yeah. What I find is that NLP itself, the kind of ideas around it. So if you strip away all of the, in NLP you learn this technique and that. If you strip all that away and just look at the ideas behind NLP, of looking at who someone is and thinking, okay, what's the sort of strategies they're playing out within them? What's behind this problem? What's behind, what would be the solution? What are the patterns going on here? Say you wanted to learn golf. We had sort of golf mentioned. Say you wanted to learn golf. If you approached it with a kind of NLP mindset, you'd approach it thinking, okay, so what is it the golfer does? Not just the techniques, but what is it they do in terms of the strategies they run through in their head? How do they approaching the golf course? How do they approach when they choose a club? How do they approach? What's their mindset behind it? What's their physicality? What's their kind of tempos that they like walk with, and what do they observe, and what order do they observe things? What is their strategy essentially for playing golf around the technique? So not just the techniques themselves that you could learn by watching and being taught them, but what are the inner strategies, all these sort of things that are built around that. So that part of NLP, that kind of idea that allegedly is what was behind developing NLP, everything else that everyone learns. And this is my issue with Ericksonian hypnotherapy as well, that I often point out that there is no such thing as Ericksonian hypnotherapy. There's an Ericksonian approach to things. There's not. Ericksonian approach isn't a therapy. So Milton Erickson would take an approach to how he was going to decide what kind of thing to do with what person and things like that, and an approach to how he would learn stuff and what have you, and sort of having that curiosity. If you strip NLP back, then you get to that same kind of thing. You get to the kind of underlying, let's search for the way that someone does this well. Let's find someone who does this well and figure out what it is they do that lets them do that well. And then let's try those different bits and pieces and see if that is actually what they do that makes them do it well. Let's sort of test it. And then if it works out, great, keep doing it. If it doesn't work out, then you move on or try something else or whatever. So that part of it, obviously, I think, yeah, that's a really good idea. And if you listen to Richard Bandler and John Grinder do their early talks back in the early 80s, their talks are very much saying, we watched Milton Erickson. We wanted to know, what is it he's doing that's different to the other therapists that makes him get results? And so we watched, and we then break down what he does. And so, that's what you do. You break down what someone does, and then you think, right, what out of this? Milton Erickson's view on all of this was that they oversimplified things by breaking it all down, and they missed the kind of artistry of it by breaking it down into just individual parts. A bit like trying to understand a song by breaking it down to the individual notes and then missing the fact that the song has to be played for you to actually have the song. Um, so so that side of it I quite like, because obviously you do have to approach client work to some extent with that kind of mindset. Like, what is the person doing that's maintaining them having this problem? What is it the person could do that would help them not have that problem? But it's the fact that they never, within NLP, it never seems to be scientifically evidenced. No one ever sits down and uh, looks at, right, so we've come up with this technique from studying Milton Erickson, for example. We've come up with this technique from studying Milton Erickson. What you want to do is then say, so this technique, this kind of Milton Erickson approach, does it actually work if you apply it to different clients as if you were applying it like Milton Erickson doing therapy? The chances are I doubt it would, because at least as it's worded within NLP books and NLP courses, I've attended practitioner and master practitioner courses. I've never done the trainers. I've got the audio. I've got an audio and video version of the trainers training course, but I've never taken, like, actually attended a trainers training NLP course. But with the NLP courses, what you end up finding is that people get so focused on things like the specific, like with Erickson, the specific language patterns, and completely miss the fact that there was a lot more to, you're essentially focusing on the end result of Erickson's mindset rather than what was Erickson's mindset. So you miss the whole kind of point of it. But yeah, so let me have a look. So for me, because I will keep this short, but I've decided I'm comfortable, so I've decided to go over the hour slightly. For me, the books that I think are a bit better, let me just move them. That's my musical instrument. For me, the books that I think are a bit better for people to read are probably things like Robert Dilts' Strategies of Genius books, and things like that, rather than a lot of the typical NLP books. So, for example, what these do is they look at the thinking styles of different people. Some of this looks at thinking styles of imaginary people. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So this one is Freud, Da Vinci, and Tesla. This one's Thinking Like Albert Einstein. This one doesn't have a cover, so I'm going to have to open it to tell you. This one is Aristotle, Sherlock Holmes, Walt Disney, and Mozart. And so, obviously, some of those you wouldn't know much about, and others of them are imaginary, like Sherlock Holmes. But they're much better books to get the idea of the underlying principles behind how you should perhaps approach NLP. So not approach NLP as some kind of therapy, not approach it as some kind of coaching, not approach it as anything more than a way to look at gathering information. So that's kind of how I look at NLP. And I know that I've been in forums on Facebook, in groups on Facebook, where I've been asked questions and I've then shared that, and it's upset people. But in my opinion, that's what NLP is good for, is sticking to the core values of trying to look at how to ask questions and gather information that will hopefully gather information about how people do things. Because whether it's gathering information about how someone does something that they excel at, like how does someone manage, someone asked me in these comments here a few weeks back, I think it was, how do I write a book? I think it was when I was reading my story out. How do I write a book? And I was saying, well, here's my strategy, but this probably wouldn't work for everyone. And this is the whole point, that if you take one person's strategy, like you take Milton Erickson's strategy for therapy, and you say, I'm going to do Milton Erickson's therapy strategy, you might not be able to, that might not match your personality. It may not match modern day times. It may not match it just may not be a fit. So when I shared my strategy of how I have to blitz it, I have to write for a big chunk of time at once, not a small chunk of time. Yeah, that's kind of what I've heard as well. So having it that it's kind of about the strategy, you could figure out my writing strategy and think, oh, I really don't like Dan's writing strategy. There's no way I would sit from 5 a.m. until 3 a.m. and only take toilet breaks. But other than that, I won't get a bite to eat. I literally will just write endlessly until I've got everything on paper. That strategy isn't going to work for everyone. The idea of, I don't plan a story. What I do is I create a character and I drop them into a world. And then I think, right, let my fingers tell the story and I'll discover where it goes. Again, that's not going to match everyone. That's, people will think, well, no, I'm someone that prefers structure. But if you're someone that prefers structure, clearly you're not going to want to do things that way. And so coming up with these strategies can be handy, but it's not good if you say Dan's way is the way to write stories or to write books, and Milton Erickson's way is the way to do therapy, or so-and-so's way is the way to play golf, or this person's way is the way to do that. What you do is you think, what are the different strategies of people who do things that you're trying to learn about, and do any of them match the kind of person you are? Or do any of them give you ideas? So I prefer people who want to learn NLP to not go to an NLP course, because you won't learn any of this, in my experience at least, from an NLP practitioner course or an NLP master practitioner course. You learn all this essentially from the books that teach those specific bits. If you go to an NLP practitioner course, I've got a couple of practitioner syllabuses behind me here. And yeah, I've got a couple of practitioner course syllabuses behind me here. And the trouble with that is that if you look through them, it's all like, now you're going to learn the circle of excellence. And now the next thing is you're going to learn what I would call the rewind technique, the fast phobia cure. Or now you're going to learn the swish pattern. Now you're going to learn the Milton model, as if somehow that's going to give you a bunch of answers. Now you're going to learn the meta model. Now you're going to learn, and it's all kind of, you're going to learn this, going to learn this, going to learn this. And none of it, it's all like learning the end result. It's all like learning the techniques that came out of someone else's thinking without any basis, which is why often when I teach hypnotherapy, I teach it the other way around. I want you to know how to do it before I tell you what you're doing. And I've often talked about this, that with hypnotherapy, ideally in 15 minutes or so of starting a training, I want you to be hypnotizing people. You can learn what language patterns you were doing instinctively afterwards. You can start it, but if you start focusing, there's a lot of, for example, hypnotherapy courses where they'll start teaching you, right, this session we're going to teach you double binds, next session embedded commands, next session double dissociation double binds, next session tag questions, next session, and they'll make you learn all these different language patterns or whatever it is. And then you'll sit in front of a client and think, am I supposed to use a double bind now? Am I supposed to use embedded command now? Am I supposed to use a double dissociation double bind? Am I supposed to use a reverse set double bind? Am I supposed to use this technique? Am I supposed to use that technique? And then you get tripped over not having any idea what on earth you're supposed to do, because you think, am I using enough of this? Am I using, rather than learn the principles of doing the thing itself, and then learn what it was you were doing afterwards. Start giving labels to what you're doing afterwards. And it's better to give the labels afterwards than it is to give the labels beforehand out of context. So I did this. A hypnotherapist who was privately coming to me for training, just one on one, I said, okay, I'll record you hypnotizing me, and then I'll tell you what you did. And so I recorded him hypnotizing me without scripts or anything. And he's someone who constantly worried, saying, I never know if I'm using the right language patterns. I never know if I'm using the right technique here or the right technique there. I said, just go with the flow. Just respond to me. Whatever you see me do, just respond to me. And so he did that. And then we both watched the footage back of him hypnotizing me. And I kept pausing it and unpausing it. And I said, well, there you've just done an embedded command. There you've just done a contingent suggestion. There you've just done a compound suggestion. There you've done a tag question. There you've just used a bunch of nominalizations. There you've done this technique. There you've done that technique. And he said, wow, I didn't know I did all of that. I didn't know that. I don't even remember. I know I've learned some of those things, but I didn't even know that I was doing any of those things. And I said, yeah, well, if you try and learn all the techniques and then try and do the therapy trying to squeeze all the techniques in, you do a bad job. If you just do the therapy and then reflectively go back over it and apply the techniques, you learn the techniques backwards rather than forwards. Yeah, with the rewind technique, obviously anything online, I've had conversations with people about this occasionally, but anything online, part of the challenge is that it's only ever laid down in one exact way. Um, it's not tailored to someone. There's no professional guiding you through it, clarifying things for you at any stage, um, checking that, you know, rewording things perhaps if it needs to be reworded. Um, you know, when you've got a person who can guide you through it, it is so much easier for them to do that way round. But yeah, and talking of yeah, so I prefer people to learn stuff where they take the labels out first, and you can learn the labels for everything that you're doing the other way round. You know, learn the labels for everything after you know how to do it. So you essentially kind of become an expert in doing it before you become an expert in being able to put into words what it is you just did. Um, but yeah, talking of Tesla, I've got a couple of books about Tesla. If I quickly find them. They're behind my handmade left-handed boomerang. Yeah, so I've got Tesla's My Inventions and Other Writings. The Life and Times of Nikola Tesla. Tesla, inventor of the modern. No, inventor. Yeah, is inventor of the modern. I was imagining the word age should be there. And the inventions, researches, and writings of Nikola Tesla. So yeah, so I've got a couple of Tesla books knocking around there. Yeah, I'll keep trying to throw it away, but it keeps coming back to me. The boomerang, before my granddad died, he gave it to me. Um, he was the accountant for I think a boomerang world champion or something or other, and the guy used to make his own boomerangs. And yeah, Michelle, it was because of you that I got my books out to show you. Yeah, he had done the accounts of this boomerang world champion guy who makes his own boomerangs. The guy was struggling with paying for my granddad's services. So he said, look, how about I make you 2 boomerangs? My granddad, like me, was left-handed. So he had a left-handed boomerang made for him and a right-handed boomerang made for my nan. And my granddad, before he died, said, look, you've got to have this because no one else in the family will know or appreciate that it's actually a left-handed boomerang. And so I want it to at least be with someone who's left-handed who will appreciate the fact that it is a left-handed one. So that's why I have a left-handed boomerang. Just like I obviously have, I have all sorts of weird things, or things that I think people probably would think are weird, like the wand that sits in front of my TV and stuff like that. And obviously I wouldn't throw yeah, groans. Obviously I wouldn't throw it because I'd probably break it. Which one of the books do you own? I've just shown 4. I think somewhere I've got one that makes I've done something around. I've got a audio. I think I did a self hypnosis audio for hypnotherapists to use to help make them better and improve at hypnotherapy. Somewhere, I think, from many years ago. Yeah, my best friend's kids for ages kept on calling me Damn Dan for some reason. And I then discovered a Garbage Pail Kid card that I think is the same name, which I shared with them. But yeah, these kind of books, I quite like them. I've got a couple of others up there, not Tesla ones, but I've got a Star Wars one and a Star Trek one, and I've got an inherited Sherlock Holmes one from Blood and Fire. Yeah, I've got Blood and Fire, the signed by George R.R. Martin. Do I feel like being autistic is what keeps me out of it now, the hypnosis stuff, other than on your channel? Probably. Well, I'm not a fan of people generally, like actually interacting with people. So cool. Glad you've got got plenty of them. So I'm not really a fan of doing one-to-one therapy. I find that when I'm doing it, it's not draining. I'm fine at doing it. I can literally do. There was a time when for charity I did a therapy day where I was just seeing people back to back, and all the money went to charity. And I literally did like back-to-back sessions from 8 a.m. until something like 10 p.m. And it's not remotely exhausting doing that, but my mindset beforehand is constant kind of, oh God, I've got to see people. I'm going to have to face all these people. They're all going to come in. I'm going to have to talk to them all and interact with them all. And I have to overcome that. A bit like maybe an actor has to overcome the kind of nerves or whatever else goes on before they go on stage. And they do fine on stage and they like being on stage, but everything in the run up to getting on stage, they really hate doing. They really hate having happen. And then they go on stage, it all goes fine. They come off stage, they're glad it all went fine. But then they have that kind of now worrying thing, oh God, I've got to go through all this again for when they next go on stage. And so I kind of get that when I do that client sessions, and I get it worse when I do teaching. And partly because I think my patience for certain things has significantly dropped over the years. Um, if I'm teaching and I'm asked questions that I think are really stupid because they're so obvious and they've already been covered or whatever, I find it much harder to not be very blunt with people. Whereas in the past, I would not really be so blunt. I would just answer them. In my head, I'd be blunt, but out loud, I think you just want me to give you the answer, so I'll just give you the answer. Um, but then as time goes on, I end up thinking, literally, that's like really old stuff that's already been answered. And and I don't know. I think as I've got older, and so my focus has evolved beyond where it was earlier on. Um, I don't like constantly arguing with people. So my view on things like hypnosis seems to be so different to nearly everyone I encounter on training courses and things, um, and in hypnotherapy communities and what have you. So I end up with people saying things about uh, stuff that is not remotely uh, in the realms of being scientific. And I just think I've got no interest in this conversation. This is stuff that going back 15 years I would talk about because I'd be interested to know what is the science around this. 15 years later, I've already been there, done that, talked about that, looked at what the science is, seen that there isn't any, and moved on. And you clinging on to that and saying, no, this is 100% real, it's true, I believe it. Um, that then ends up with me thinking, well, I don't mind if you believe it, that's your choice, but I don't want to have to waste all my time having these conversations about it. So I have far less patience for when things kind of in a course or something, when people want me to kind of essentially talk about things that I'm not really remotely interested in wasting my time talking about, because I want to talk about what I'm interested in here and now, not what I was interested in 15 years ago or 20 years ago, where my knowledge has expanded and moved forward. And so that's kind of my problem. One of my problems when it comes to teaching, that I'm not in the same place as I think other people are. I've often pointed out that what I would prefer is people who are already perhaps trained enough or interested enough to just have like a practice group, people that just want to um, practice and explore stuff, explore like learning and what have you, not necessarily kind of this is my belief, this is how I want to be, and going all the way back to things that I've moved well beyond. And I know that some of that is due to, or most likely is due to being autistic and having that kind of rigidity and focus on my own interests very selfishly on what I want to be thinking about and doing and talking about. Um, I used to write with both hands, but I used to find it easier to write mirror writing with one hand and forwards with the other. Um, in school books, when teachers used to complain about my uh, sort of my handwriting, I would then write either really small, so I can get like 114 words on a single line. I'd write backwards instead, uh, so that they'd have to read it all written backwards. Sometimes I'd kind of zone out so that I could write two separate things in two different directions at the same time. Um, one forwards and one backwards was easier. Um, yeah, I end up talking about all sorts of things in these chats. It's all stuff that I'm talking about, though. All stuff that I want to talk about, though. But at the same time, even doing these chats, obviously, um, it's kind of my brain is saying, you're far more comfortable if you just were sat on the sofa watching YouTube videos. Um, yeah, my books do go back to the 1700s. I've got books on mesmerism from the 1780s. That does sound fun, writing everything through a stencil. Yeah, and I think the thing, I'm sure everyone probably deep down feels very similar, that you want to be doing stuff that's almost like I'm a very scientific minded person, and growing up I always imagined I would go to university, I'd be doing a degree or a bunch of degrees in a university where I'm doing lots of experimenting, kind of at the forefront of knowledge. So I've got all this knowledge behind me, and I'm now at the forefront of knowledge, trying to progress knowledge further. And my belief was that I would do my degrees and then I would probably stay in a university, working in a university, most likely, perhaps becoming a professor in the university to share some of the knowledge. But I'm sharing knowledge, including knowledge that's at the forefront of the knowledge that I have helped to create. And that's what I imagined I'd be doing. I'd always imagined being at the forefront of it and constantly building on the shoulders of giants, as the saying is, constantly trying to progress things forward rather than constantly going back and constantly focusing on stuff that I think I've got no interest in this. This is like this conversation is interesting to you because it's new to you. This conversation isn't interesting to me because I've said this 1,000 times. And so I'd reach that point, and I'd reach that point in therapy as well, where you're seeing client after client after client. Nearly every client will say, "This is probably the worst case that I'm probably the worst case you've ever seen. You've probably never met anyone with this problem as bad as me." And nearly everyone would have the same kind of bunch of underlying patterns to their problem, and you would end up largely suggesting the same kinds of things over and over again, and um, you know, you would just end up almost like, yes, you have to tailor everything to every individual, and everything is new for that individual. Um, but for you as an individual, it gets less and less feeling like you're moving forward because you learn from every so separating that out into therapy and teaching. When you're doing the therapy, you obviously learn something new every therapy session yourself as well. You gain something new. You um, have someone react in a slightly different way to what you're expecting, but it does gradually get less and less profound new learning the more clients you see. You end up with a sort of point where there could be a bunch of clients that actually it's relatively straightforward with them, and then you get a couple of clients that stand out as, I'm so happy that that didn't work because I have to learn now. I have to actually progress. I did something wrong. I didn't figure something out. And so you start looking forward to the times when things don't work for you because they're the times that suddenly um, you're going to learn something new here. So you never try to obviously make mistakes. You want to do the best you can all the time. And if you try to make mistakes and you're not going to learn because all you've done is learn that you didn't do something you actually knew how to do. So it's not that. It's that you spend so much time attempting to, sort of doing stuff at a higher proficiency, that it's so rare to encounter a situation where you think, I'm so happy on a training course. I'm so happy I've finally been asked a question I don't know the answer to, because now I'm going to go and research that and I'm going to try and learn it so that if I get asked that again, I know that subject inside out. And so you then go away and you do that and you master that subject, sort of that little extra bit, so that then if you're ever asked anything about that again, you know it and it's brilliant and you're glad that you've been there and you've gained that new knowledge. And for me, the thing I have an obsession about beyond everything else is constantly wanting to learn new knowledge, not necessarily constantly wanting to revisit old knowledge that I know I already know. So even if I don't remember that I know it, as soon as I see it, I think, oh yeah, yeah, I remember that. I do know that, and that doesn't have the same kind of buzz as constant discovery. And so for me, I always want that kind of constant discovery, that constant moving forward and striving forward. And the more knowledgeable I've got, the less I've enjoyed teaching in a structured environment. So, as in teaching where I'm going through, okay, I'm going to teach this course from A through to Z. I don't end up wanting to do that because I think, oh, for me, it's such old stuff that I'm teaching the basics, which is good, but for me, it's not stimulating. I'm not using my time in a way that stimulates me. I'm using my time in a way that stimulates those who I'm with, hopefully. And so, yeah, so for me, and that's, I think, why I actually don't mind the sleep meditation live streams, because I have never during those streams used the ideas that have just come out in that stream. I've never, everything on that page ended up on that page at the time that I wrote it down. The story that came out of that at that exact moment in time. It didn't come out of that any sooner. I didn't pre-plan anything. It was all, I am learning now about how these pieces can fit together into something that has a structure, has a life almost. I'd be a chocolate chip cookie, I'm sure. Although chocolate digestives, for those who know what chocolate digestives are, they last, I think, 27 seconds. When you dunk them in a cup of tea, they can last for about 27 seconds. I'd say 24 for being careful, because if the tea's too hot, it softens it much quicker. So say 20 to 24 seconds dunked in a tea, and they still have enough strength to get to your mouth without falling in your tea or your lap. So anyway, that was an aside about biscuits. But yeah, so I think the sleep meditations are interesting, not when I do them myself. That gets very tedious. I get very stressed, very angry, or whatever. But when it's done on in a live stream, the fact that I don't know how I'm going to piece all these bits together, I'm constantly having to. My brain is constantly having to work, and I'm discovering what my brain will do with that knowledge that I've never encountered before, and how it will turn that knowledge into something hopefully valuable and useful for people. And that is a good thing and a good feeling. Whereas, yeah, I would last 24 seconds dumped in a cup of tea. So that is a good feeling. Whereas, say I'm teaching a course, a weekend course on hypnosis, or even a diploma course on hypnosis, the bit that I suddenly spark up and light up is when I'm off script, is when I'm no longer kind of, oh, I've got to teach you this because it's the basics, it's where you're at. You're perhaps not even at this stage yet. That's why you're here. That's not particularly stimulating for me. It's when I'm then asked questions, and some of those questions are, but what if you're in this kind of situation? And I'll eventually get a question where I think, oh, I've never actually been in that situation. What would I do? And now I perk up a bit. I'm answering something that's a bit more creative and a bit different. So yeah, so that's kind of, and that I think is, for me at least, is because of being autistic. Have any of you read Dan's book, Look Into My Eyes? I think a few people might have done. Yeah, there's some of it that I've got on my blog that anyone can read without buying my book. Obviously, I'm always happier when people purchase it because then I make about £1 or something, depending on whether if you buy the ebook. If you buy the paperback, I think I make about 50p or 30p or something. But there is plenty of it out there for free. Plus, I did obviously read big chunks of it here on my YouTube channel the other week. But yeah, so that was a long answer, but that was to do with obviously trying to explain the way my brain works. That's always an interesting thing to try and explain. Yeah. So, and I've always been someone that likes sharing knowledge, but the knowledge I want to share is my current knowledge as opposed to my past knowledge. Stuff that I'm currently excited by because it's new and fresh and it's at the forefront of me progressing my knowledge. I learn that knowledge better by sharing it and talking about it and putting it into my words rather than in a research paper bunch of words. Like the implementation intentions. I obviously read an entire chapter, essentially a paper on implementation intentions. And for me, that was like, I've read this already. But conversations around implementation intentions and then looking into how to apply the implementation intentions and how you would word them so you get the best effect and things like that, that suddenly becomes more interesting. And I then perk up more because I think, yeah, I am interested how to move this forward. So, as I say, I'd always imagined that I would be progressing some scientific field forward, that I would be writing science papers where I have the pleasure of being able to constantly read research papers and just moving things forward. What's the most exciting thing I've learned in the last 3 months? I don't know. To me, my level of, if I say something's exciting, then I'm, or if someone asks me what's exciting, to me, it's like, yeah, that was okay. So my level of excitement means that I've been normal. I'm trying to think what the most exciting thing from the last 3 months would be. Don't know. Probably my gradual improvement on a piano. That's not a knowledge-based thing specifically, like a scientific-y, knowledge-y based thing. But I can't play the piano, but I do have my granddad's electronic piano here. I inherited it after he died. And so I gave away my old one so that I can get this one in here. So yeah, it is knowledge, but I don't think it was the kind of answer that was being searched for. And I do enjoy The Simpsons, just for the other question I can see there. Yeah, so when I record pre-recorded hypnosis sessions, I I hallucinate. So this is how I teach people on my training courses as well. I teach that what you do is hallucinate the person you're doing it for in front of you and respond to that hallucination. And so essentially hypnotize the hallucination and work with the hallucination and just say what you would say if that person was sat in front of you now. And it gets some really weird effects. So I've had things like saying, do I ask stupid questions? I don't think there's a stupid question, is there? I thought there was just questions and answers. Um, so yeah, so you get interesting things like, for example, I made a track for somebody, and during the making of the track, I said, it's okay, you're allowed to shift around in your seat a little bit if you want. And you're also allowed to find things a bit amusing as you begin to relax even deeper into hypnosis. And then the woman I'd made the track for, at that exact moment, felt the urge to shift. And so she shifted around in her seat. And then as she started shifting, I said, it's okay to shift around a bit if you want. And then she started smiling, thinking, no, no, he can't have known that. He's This is a recording. And so when she started smiling, and I then said, it's okay, you're allowed to smile about things as you go deeper into hypnosis. And then she fed back to me that at that point she got so freaked out, she opened her eyes to check that I wasn't actually sat in the room opposite her, because she didn't have a clue how I could be commenting on her reactions in those moments that she had had. And I said, well, because the hallucinated you did exactly that. So she sort of opened her eyes, looked, saw I wasn't there, closed her eyes, and carried on drifting and went with the session. Um, but yeah, so bit of hair. So, but that was because the hallucination of her did exactly those things, and it was made for her. So I just trusted that I'd met her, and so I trusted that I'd got a representation of her, and that that's how she would react. Um, well, you'd have to just look at the structure of it and come up with that implementation intention, um, whatever's right for you. Obviously, it's more than I could probably answer without having an actual conversation. Um, but ultimately, you want some observable stimulus followed by, so if I see, or if I get given, so writing school papers, it could be that, I don't know, if I see that I've got to get them marked, then I will do X, or whatever it happens to be. You find something that would be the stimulus, and then find the uh, action you want to take, which would be writing the school papers or marking school papers or whatever it happens to be. And if you obviously you want to make, when you set it, get in the right frame of mind. So get in that mindset of um, following structures and things like that before you set the implementation intention. Before you do that, make sure you've got a goal and the reason why you're going to be doing this, and that it is important to you. Um, and then, yeah, just go and tell it to yourself. Maybe every few days, tell it to yourself as an idea. Um, yeah, all you can see is the little bit behind me. Obviously, as I've shown before, it kind of goes up and around, and obviously on multiple levels. And there's the Encyclopedia Britannica just that side of me, plus um, books on a spinny thing, and science magazines. And my computer desk is made out of books because I didn't have any room, so I had to make it out of books. So I have a lot of stuff that, this is kind of what's inside my head. It's the external representation of what's inside me. And then I've got boxes that anyone who watched my videos before I moved to this position will have seen all the boxes behind me that are also full of books, or largely full of books. I suspect that any salt that you find will always be in the last location you check. Yeah, I think I'm no different to anyone else. I know someone who may well have the virus, but were told we're not going to do check. They were told when they went to hospital, well, we could check you, but if we checked everyone who came in here with symptoms of the virus, we'd be here all day checking people. So we're not going to check you. That's what they were told. And then they were sent home. So I may know someone. I used to hang tablespoons off my nose. Just another random fact. Um, Obviously, it was also free. But yeah, personally, I don't give much uh, care or weight to IQ tests and things. This was my issue. Tests in general has been my issue in schools and things, that I'm fascinated by learning and being at the front of knowledge. I'm not particularly bothered about having to try and prove to other people what I do or don't know. So the thought of having to then recount things in tests, and then people break things down in tests in a way that uh, I don't necessarily process things. So they'll say, "What are the 6 steps of this?" And I'll be thinking, "Well, which parts of what you do are you saying are the steps?" Because I can think of like 18 or 20 different things that I would be doing to do that. Which ones are the ones that you are calling the steps? And so I find it very difficult when it comes to breaking things down, or working things out based on someone else's arbitrary way of defining things. Um, I swear I saw a question about music, but it's probably, oh, it's already gone up up my page. Do I like music? I It's a difficult one. Yes, I like music. I think most people like music. Um, I have a bit of an obsession with wanting to learn to play music on different instruments, even though I can't. Um, I'm constantly beating out rhythms, and so I think I'm not too bad with like drums and things. I think I can pick things like that up. When it comes to listening to music, I like stuff that evokes emotion in me, or makes me uncontrollably want to move. But generally, I don't know, slower stuff normally, more relaxing stuff, because or else I feel overwhelmed and feel my brain beginning to fry. And and I have quite an eclectic taste of music. Um, I've got probably 1,500 Elvis Presley songs, unique songs. Um, so I've got dozens and dozens and dozens of Elvis Presley albums. I've got lots of Michael Ball and lots of Russell Watson and all of Katie Mello's stuff, and tons and tons of relaxation music. And I have Meatloaf's albums, Guns N' Roses, Nirvana, um, all sorts of things. I like rock ballads because they're generally slower. Yep, I'm going to stop at 2 hours. So yeah, um, I'm sure we can possibly talk about procrastination in more detail at some point. Have to go away and give it some thought. Uh, yeah, procrastination, I think, is something that a lot of people get affected by. But then that's partly why you would do things like implementation intentions, something that makes it so that you just end up um, starting rather than thinking about starting and then putting it off. great taste. Yeah, so I've a lot of Elvis Presley. Um, I don't know. I am terrible with the names, apart from the singers or the musicians who I specifically get every item of. I'm going to stop in just a minute. I generally am no good with names, so I listen to like relaxation type, you know, chill out albums, things like that, and there'll be lots of musicians, obviously, with their tracks on there, and I usually have no idea about who the musicians are because I'm listening to the track, never reading the back of the. I buy CDs still, never reading the back of the CD case. Yeah, Katie Melua is probably one of my favorite artists. I was a bit late to the game. She appeared kind of in the music scene, and because I don't listen to the radio particularly, I don't listen to like music on the radio or anything like that. I had never really paid attention. I'd never sort of heard her. I heard of her name, but I didn't know who she was. And then I just heard her voice on a relaxation album, and thought, oh, I've got to check out this person's music. Another one that people might like is oh, what's his name now? He did a song "Pencil Full of Lead." I'm sure someone can search for "Pencil Full of Lead" and then Paolo Nutini. I quite like Paolo Nutini's um, stuff. Yeah, I have got Monsters and Magical Sticks. There's no such thing as hypnosis. I've got it up here. Um, yeah, I think I just filmed it with a different camera or with a different setup. But yeah, so I'm going to go. Obviously, I'm back again tomorrow, and kind of 7:30 Dan time again, and yeah, so we'll look at what you want to talk about, and obviously, if the live chat, because I don't want to spend all my time, obviously, not able to talk because I'm too busy trying to have words go through my head from reading as well as talking. But at the same time, I obviously don't want the live chat to get out of hand if anyone drops in who seems to be stirring things, so to speak. There's nothing wrong with people having opinions, but you know what I mean, like creating discord or whatever, um, rather than just having forward moving, you know, more positive chat. I like things being positive, especially at a time when we're trying to do this so that we don't talk about the things that go on outside of our houses in the world at the moment, in every country, um, so that we can take our minds off of things like that and take our minds off of negative stuff. And so, obviously, I don't want the live chat to end up being a place where people are provoking negativity and antagonizing or anything like that. I want it to be like a forward moving positive thing where people are getting on, and there's nothing wrong with disagreement, but people are getting on and being positive. So anyway, so I will go, and I will see those of you who can join me tomorrow here tomorrow. Feel free to give a thumbs up if you found this interesting in any way. You can be silly as long as it doesn't overtake everything that disrupts and annoys everyone else who's in the chat. Um, so yeah, because I was waiting for the person obviously who commented over there. I was waiting for them to comment a reply to my reply to them over on their comment on my video today. But anyway, good to see you all here. I will see whoever can make it tomorrow here tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in.